What's up, everybody, and welcome back to another Pokemon investment. We're now on the third episode of this series, and we're going to be focusing on what sets should you buy.
Oh, thank God.
If you've missed the first two, we've already covered 30 years of Pokemon investment and how we're currently seeing thousands and thousands of percentages of returns.
Wait, are you serious?
In the second video, we dove into fundamentals. How do I get started? We looked at budgets. We tried to understand concepts of diversification. And then how do we set money aside with these things in mind to then look at a Pokemon investment strategy?
Wow. That's amazing.
And now today we get into probably one of the most interesting and fun topics around, well, which set is it that I should buy? So if you haven't checked out those videos already, please go ahead and do so. That gives you a lot of context for what we're going to dive into today.
I know, I'm going.
If you know me already in this topic and arena, you know that I like to see my numbers. I like to quantify things. It goes a lot to my background, but it also is how that I want to make decisions for our Pokemon investment in this home.
All of a sudden, things started to make sense.
We do look at what's happening in the market. We look at trends and what some of the trends are around buying, selling, but we also want to quantify this. And I haven't seen anybody do any quantifications yet other than some basic verbal comments on what it might be. And they sure didn't share it with you.
Perhaps you're right.
I hope that you find this valuable. As always, this is not a financial advice. I don't recommend that you go out there and dump all your savings into Pokemon.
I don't know what I'm doing.
I instead suggest that you just use this as one of many tools in your toolbox or in your back pocket so that you can make informed decisions when it comes to Pokemon investment. So what I've done today is I've given us two numbers. I try to break down all the complexity and all the hard work that I'm putting into this to break it down to two numbers so that I can share that with you and also have something simple and easy to explain. So I'll give us now two scores. I'll give us first a investment score. This investment score, it represents if you have product already in your investment inventory, what is that product's investment score, which represents its current trajectory on where it is in terms of the ROI, so your return on investment, as well as what does it look like over time? Will that be one of the sets that potentially grows the most? Now, there's a lot to take into account, and I, by all means, don't think this is finished or 100% accurate. There is no 100% accurate. It is trying to do the best with the data that I can put together manually because nobody's able to provide all the data that I need in one place, and nobody's definitely representing this to you in a nice website or an investment platform when it comes to Pokemon. So a lot of this is manual, my own perception on how we might want to go through this, and I'll explain it all. But the second one then is our buy now score. The buy now score represents exactly as it sounds. It is what set should I buy today? So they do have a big overlap in how they are evaluated and calculated. But then of course we're looking a little bit differently when we look at the buy now lens because we want to see what is the current MSRP? What is it selling for? How does that return on investment look in this very early stage? Is it in print? And we kind of change the perspective because you want to buy more when the price is low and it has a good score to be high in the future, right?
Yeah. Yes, of course.
So this is how we try to look at these two scores. One is I have inventory already, and how is it going to grow over time? And then, of course, taking that same knowledge over growth and then saying, but then also what should I buy today? What's a good price that's available? And then how would that also grow over time? So we look at those two. And again, lots of overlap there.
Trust me. It's going to make sense in a minute.
So let's take a look at one of these examples and I'll kind of explain them as I go through this so that you can see how I came to this calculation and some of the reasoning behind the thought process. So let's see first the criteria of the score. The criteria of the score comes into a couple of different factors that are all weighted to say what's more important versus one perspective, and then what maybe have more weight versus a different perspective, okay? So again, the holding versus buying, right? If you missed the first two videos, please understand that everything I'm speaking about here is purely around a sealed booster box. And we only look at main expansion sets and not specialty sets. So what does that mean? I don't look at any V boxes. I don't look at specialty, blister packs. I'm only looking at a sealed booster box and not sets like Crown Zenith or Pokemon Go, because they don't get sold in booster boxes. Specialty sets only come in other products. And for me, I still think the best and safest investment long term is always going to be a sealed booster box. So that's what this context is here. So if you didn't see those videos, that's the view or the lens that we're looking through when we talk about this. So let's take a look at one example, and the most obvious one, and this is how I check and balance myself as well. I did the calculations in a perspective of not taking into consideration too much of what's happening on the market. Now, obviously, ROI will have some representation or any value really that I'm grabbing off of certain websites, which I'll show you which websites I'm using here in just a second. You'll represent some perspective in the market for that value, right? So I do take that into account, but I also want to say now with everything else that I've added to this, does that number either represent what's happening in the market and give a good correlation, or do I have a huge gap? And so that was a self-check for me to say, are the numbers that I'm calculating at least somewhat indicative of what's happening in the market? And in most cases, you can see the answers. Actually, at least for the Sword and Shield era, the answer is yes. And I do want to preface this by saying that I only have Sword and Shield together at the moment. You'll quickly see why. This has taken me a lot of time to go through, a lot of considerations, adjustment on the calculations. So this isn't some quick overnight calculation I'm just dumping into a spreadsheet. It's taken me weeks to get data together, do research, kind of play with what the calculations might be, how we might weight things. So it's taken me a lot of time, and I've only gotten Sword and Shield data so far, but as I've done with the ROI topics, I try to go from base set all the way down to Scarlet and Violet. So I will try to do the same for this, and of course continue to check in with you over time as we get more and more data populated. So let's take a look at the first one and the most obvious one that stands out, and that's obviously this one. We have a investment score of 9,158 and a buy now score of 2,290. By far the biggest number here. So what is behind this and which set is it? So this set, as you can probably imagine, is going to be Evolving Skies. Okay. And if you've seen the first video, you've already seen how we calculated ROI and how we talk about that. So please do go back and watch that if you haven't already. But the ROI on this one is about 247%. We have only 1 year in terms of return. We have 34 specialty cards. So specialty cards is another factor. We tend to look across all of them and we try to sum them up, but we have everything from Galarian galleries to trainer galleries and otherwise. So it does take all those into account. So there's 34 specialty cards. And then I will eventually add a playability score. The playability score, as you can probably guess, if you play TCG online or maybe in person, is going to be quite complex because we need to look at what's in standard play, what's in expanded play, which cards are more popular versus not. And doing all of that mathematically is going to be complicated, and it changes very quickly. So
What?
I don't know if I'll ever get to have a score here that I'm happy with, but for now I don't have anything, and I'm still trying to wrap my head around how I might go about adding a playability score to this. In addition to that, we have a popular Pokemon score, perhaps one of the most controversial numbers I'm going to have on the spreadsheet. Which Pokemon are popular? This was driven by dollar amount. So when we look at popular Pokemon historically over all sets, which ones had the highest value? So we came to that conclusion through this analysis. And so all your typical Pokemon that you would expect to be there for the most part are going to be there, like your Charizards, your Lugias, your Dialgas, your Gengars, all the ones that were really popular historically, as well as still have a good dollar amount in the current time. So we took those and we looked then across every set and said, well, how many of these popular Pokemon are in the set?
That was easy.
And why is that important? Well, because that will eventually drive price over time. With those popular Pokemon, it's ones that everybody knows, that loves. And of course, there's a lot of nuance there. Sometimes it may be a basic card or a stage 2 card versus a VMAX or a trainer gallery. So I do understand that loses that context, but that perspective of which cards are more valuable and how do we take that into account would be better captured in set value. So when we look at set value, we look at every card in the set and its current value. And so then what's the total value of that set if you had all cards? And then of course we look at print status. Is it in print or out of print? Now, probably another controversial topic, but I make it pretty simple. I know it's not 100% accurate, and that's okay with me. It gives a clear indicator. And here's how I did this. I simply look at the Pokemon Center website and ask myself, is that booster box for sale by Pokemon? If it's not, then I say it's out of print. I know that's not accurate 100% in terms of in print or out of print, but it is a pretty good indicator to say that if Pokemon's selling a booster box, for example, of Brilliant Stars, then I can also probably walk into a Walmart and a Target and perhaps even my local LGS and find some type of Brilliant Stars product. And I know there's a little bit of controversy around perhaps the Evolving Skies. That one, I know there were some small drops on the Pokemon Center website that sold out very quickly that never made it perhaps to a distributor. I'm not taking into those kind of nuances. It's more bigger picture stuff.
Who's got a big idea?
An idea bigger than the Grand Canyon?
Yes, indeed.
With all these factors into account, we then try to calculate a score for you, so to give you an easy answer. And so definitely we think at this point, based on the data we have and how we've done the calculation, that Evolving Skies is going to be one of those really great sets out of the Sword and Shield series. And I think we all agree to that. We've seen it. There's a big market hype. Everybody's trying to buy it out. The Moonbryon probably is the #1 card in the Sword and Shield series. So I think it does represent itself quite well in the numbers. Let's take a look at another example to see how this looks, right? So the next one down in terms of the investment score and the buy now score. With this one, we see that Brilliant Stars, which is this record here, is now the second best one. It has a score of 342. So if you have this product, it's going to be one of the fastest growing sets below Evolving Skies. And if you don't have it already, it's still in print. It still can be easily purchased on the Pokemon Center website. It has a overall set value of $820.45. It has 23 popular Pokemon in that set, and it has 44 specialty cards in the set. We're already looking at about 82% return of investment in terms of the MSRP versus current selling price. And of course, we're even under a year, right? So this looks really good at this stage.
Very nice.
The third best set at this stage is going to be Lost Origin. This one surprised me just a little bit, but when I looked at the numbers, it did make a lot of sense. So we already have a 40% return, right? So it's not as much as some other ones, but return of investment isn't the only thing that we look at. We also look at specialty cards, right? So we have 51 specialty cards in the set. We also look at number of special Pokemon or popular Pokemon in the set. We got 16 in this one. We look at set value, which is a pretty high set value for that set. And then, of course, it's still in print. You can still buy it relatively easily in terms of MSRP or close to MSRP. And, of course, we see that then as a good set to pick up. And I think this is going to be a popular trend. You're going to see this even if we start to look into Scarlet and Violet, say it's a year or two later. I think the story is going to be something similar. As long as the set is relatively good, and Pokemon is making mostly good sets these days. They don't make too many bad ones. We'll cover the 2 bad ones definitely that you can see here in this depiction. But for the most part, the sets are pretty good today, and they're doing better and better and better. We're probably going to see something similar in that newer sets that are pretty good are always going to be the ones you want to buy as soon as they hit the market, and you can get it at or slightly below MSRP. That's really the best general advice with all the numbers and all the complexity aside. If you have a good set that has some good cards and you can buy it slightly below or at MSRP when it comes out, that's probably going to be the best general advice that you can give. And then if you want to dive deeper, then you can look at numbers like this. Let's change the perspective. Let's flip over to now the worst sets and see why perhaps they are the worst sets.
Sure, why not? Unless, yes, I mean, whatever. It's all good, unless it's bad.
Now we see we have a terrible investment score of 3. We have a buy now score of 1. And you might wonder, well, which set is that? I can give you 2 guesses, right? It's either going to be Rebel Clash or probably Darkness Ablaze. Or I'm sorry, Battle Styles. So here it's Battle Styles. And we have only a 9% return so far in year 1. We have only 20 specialty cards in the set. We only have 3 popular Pokemon. The set value for Battle Styles is $571.38. You cannot buy this booster box right now on the Pokemon Center. That may change in the future, but for today, that's not the case. We only then have a investment score of a 3 and a buy now score of a 1. So I don't think anybody here is surprised. That's one of the lowest sets. I think everybody knows Battle Styles isn't that great. It's not the most sought after set. The biggest cards in there are Urshifu, which aren't necessarily a historical legendary Pokemon in any way. It's some cool artwork. I personally like it. I have Urshifu in one of my fighting decks. But from an investment standpoint, sorry Urshifu, you don't really cut it. Having 15 Urshifu cards in Battle Styles doesn't really help it, achieve a high investment score.
That was disrespectful.
The next set that we're going to look at has an investment score of 9 and a buy now score of 2. And I think we've already seen which one that was going to be, and that's going to be your Darkness Ablaze. So the ROI on that one sits at about 43%. We have only 2 years of investment there in terms of since release date to today. And then roughly 12 special cards according to Pokemon, and only 7 popular Pokemon, which gives a total value of the set around $244. It's out of print and, not the best one.
Are you trying to hurt my feelings? Because if so, you are succeeding. Fortunately, my feelings regenerate at twice the speed of a normal man's.
Just looking at this, you can see quite easily how we can start to construct our scores and how that can help us make informed, quantified decisions. Can it be better? For sure. Is it perfect? Definitely not. Will it ever be? No. But it's a great start, and I haven't seen anybody else do this, so I hope that you see this as something useful and valuable. Let me just quickly cover how I came up with some of this. I do look at the card lists, so I go for every card in every set, and I list out the card number, of course, the set and the series, and that way I can look at, does it have a popular Pokemon? And then from there, I look at a popular Pokemon list, and I do a count per set. So then we look left to right. For each set, we have everything from Alakazam to Articuno to Blastoise, all the way down to, Venusaur, Zapdos, Zeraora, and everything in between. So this is just a quick glance at how I came to some of the numbers. And this is really just some Excel magic to then look at every one of the sets, match based on the set name, count the number of occurrences, and gives us a nice little sum. And you can see this right here, and it kind of correlates quite nicely to what you saw in the other tab as well. We can see that Silver Tempest has 19 popular Pokemon, Lost Origin has 16, Asteroidians has 16, the Brilliant Stars 23, Fusion Strike 18, 23 of Celebrations. Again, I do have a few mixes of our specialty sets here, but that wasn't for the purpose of the calculation. It was just curiosity. Evolving Skies has 43, which also tells us something quite important about Evolving Skies and why it's so popular. It's not just the Moonbryon. It has so many good cards in it. And until you quantify it and you see it laid out like this, it's really your personal opinion, which is fine. But personal opinions aren't really great to make investment decisions on. It's better to make those a concrete, quantified decision. So when you look at popular Pokemon over the history of 30 years that raised the most money, then you have something that you can quantify, and then you look at every set and say, which of these Pokemon are here? And again, it's not 100% accurate because the differences in cards and card values are not taken into account. But then when you also combine that with set value, it does give you a pretty good idea about popular Pokemon to set value. And then you look at that over time, and it does give you a pretty good correlation of what the potential value in the future will be.
Thank you so much for what was in my head a standing ovation.
We got Chilling Reign 11, Battle Styles 3, again no surprise, Vivid Voltage 16, Darkness Ablaze 7, Rebel Clash 6, and Sword and Shield base set 9, right? All right, so let's move into now the summary as well as some of the resources that I used to get to this point. So the summary of this is basically, you can see now I've pulled out the same data but just sorted by the buy now score. We basically see that Evolving Skies is number 1, Brilliant Stars is number 2, then we go into Lost Origin, Silver Tempest, Astral Radiance, Chilling Reign, Fusion Strike, Sword and Shield base, Rebel Clash, Vivid Voltage, which I'm a little bit surprised about. I do like that one. Maybe I'm missing something or some context there that I need to dig into. And then Darkness Ablaze and Battle Styles. The last 3 being Rebel Clash, Darkness Ablaze, and Battle Styles. I don't think anybody is surprised they're at the bottom. And I don't think anybody's surprised, at least at the top 2, or maybe most of the ones in the top 5. So really, this does indicate and somewhat represent what's happening in the market, and what we see in terms of Pokemon investment conversation, and what's happening on the buy space. What products are hard to find? What's getting bought up quickly? Evolving Skies is a perfect example of that. And then to close, what resources did I use? As I mentioned in the first video, we do use eBay and TCG Player for a lot of our last sold prices. So if we look at TCG Player, we can see if we go for a Chilling Reign booster box, we'll be able to see the current prices, what they last sold for. So we definitely use this as one of our sources. We also cross-reference that with the past sellings on eBay. So we'll come into eBay and do the same thing. You can see here I was finishing up some of the ROI research around each booster box since the beginning. And we were looking at, this example was Dark Explorers. Anytime I can find, especially on eBay, the actual sold prices, I'll do that first. And now that I'm getting back into a lot of the older sets in terms of research, I'm having a hard time finding some actual sales data. But we do have at least listings of what's the buy it now price. And I try to at least take that because it's more current. Because if I go back then to June, July, or even January of last year, for me, that's too much time that's passed by. And we obviously see a lot of market fluctuation. So I try to get something within the last 3 or 4 months. If I don't see anything that was sold in the last 3 or 4 months, then I'll try to go to eBay and look at the buy it now price. We look at those for what's being sold and mainly for calculating ROI. We also use TCG Player to understand some of the most valuable cards. So if we take a look, for example, at let's just take the Silver Tempest set. And if we look at Silver Tempest and then we filter this by cards as the product type, and then we sort by market price, high to low, then we have a pretty good idea, at least for this specific set, what are the top cards, what are people actually paying for it, and we can dig into those individually and see, but you can get a good glance here at about how we look at some of the individual card prices. We also use our Limitless TCG to understand what's popular in terms of TCG play. Again, I don't have that score yet, but this is where I'm looking at to try to understand that and try to bring a perspective of the TCG game and its impact on investment and how we can account for that in our overall strategy. I use our Pokelector, which is my favorite website for my actual personal collections because I'm also a collector. I also play TCG. I'll actually be playing in the regionals here this month, so I'm super excited about that. We also trade. We do pretty much everything Pokemon cards, so we just love it all. But I use Pokelector as my collection source. And by the way, I have no affiliation to any website or company I'm mentioning here. I don't have any kickbacks. I'm just showing you what I use and how I use it. Not necessarily promoting any one product. Here is just a good place for me to see the exact cards in the collection. Not necessarily, I don't use the prices here, but I do look at the lists. I look at the Pokemon. This is where I end up building a lot of the card lists that I showed you when I'm assessing what Pokemon are in which sets. I get the lists from here. We then move over to the Pokemon Wizard. I use Pokemon Wizard at the moment only for assessing the actual set value. So every card in the set and what is its value. And it's also pretty nice because it gives you a trend. So what is that trend? Now, I don't know over what time frame, if that's the last 30 days or something like that. But right now we just use current price as the overall set value. And again, I was combining, for example, in my Silver Tempest analysis, I'll combine both the Silver Tempest set as well as the Trainer Gallery set. Okay. We do look at some individual card prices. Pokemon prices is one that we use, and you can see what some of the top Pokemon are. So we're combining this with TCG Player a little bit as well, and trying to make sure that we do include a lot of the most popular Pokemon, even if they're dropping in price, which ones are selling for the most and have the highest value over time. So we're looking at that as another factor. I was going to try to consider PSA into this. I ended up not doing that. I found it more complexing and confusing because we're talking about sealed investments, and I didn't want to get into the PSA gradings and individual cards there because then it takes us down a whole nother realm of investment, which is not the purpose. I only wanted card prices to understand popular Pokemon and set values that would drive booster box prices in the future. So I only look at individual cards in the context of a booster box being sealed. I don't want to look at individual cards in terms of investment opportunities because that's not a space I'm currently into. And then last but not least, we also look at the official Pokemon Center website, what booster boxes are available, what they're currently selling for, and that's one more source of how we built up a lot of this data.
This is great. Really filled my cup, so to speak.
So now as we expand our Pokemon investment knowledge, and we've now gained experience on understanding return of value over 30 years across many different sets, we understand investment principles and how we can create budgets and protect our investments through diversification and smart planning. And now we know which sets we should be looking at least in the present, to buy. The next question is going to be, but how do I track and manage all this? That's why you should take a look at the next video here, and we'll talk about how you can track all of this information, and I'll try to help give you some useful resources to make your investment journey successful.